Welcome to another episode of the Information Addicts podcast. My name's Cassidy. I'm an information addict, and this is my podcast where I explore information, ideas, and beliefs and try to do those things more responsibly. Today, I have a conversation that has actually been in the vault for a little while now, and I'm finally glad I can release it, but it's with my friend Jess. Jess has his own little YouTube channel, often talks about the book of Job in the Bible, and spends a lot of time on the Discord and Voxer talking with people about big ideas. A while back, he did a conversation with Paul about narrative and story, and I thought it was really interesting, so I continued that conversation with him, and I just thought it was really beautiful, and it went to a lot of emotional places, and so I'm really happy to share it with you all. Hi, Jess.
Hi, Cassidy.
It's so good to talk to you again.
It's good to talk to you too.
Well, I always start with a little intro for my guests for people who don't know you. So why don't you give a little intro and then we can kind of move into the main conversation.
Yep. My name is Jess and I'm an animator and father and husband in Kansas City. I've been doing my animations in the area of like commercials and marketing. And I've been doing that for like 10 years. And so I'm also part of the Bridges of Meaning Discord community where I know Cassidy from. And and recently had a conversation with Paul about storytelling. I've been really interested in storytelling because about 5-6 years ago, I kind of realized that I had no idea what a story was or how to actually tell one. And so I kind of started diving into some of that, but which has led me all sorts of different ways.
And how did you get started in animation? Because that's fairly new, yeah? Well, I guess 10 years, but...
Yeah, well, I went to school for audio engineering. So I finished school in about 2003, 2004, right when basically the whole music industry or the recording industry was taking a big dump because they didn't know what to do with the internet yet. And so... and then also it became possible for bands to record at home on a computer. They didn't have to go into the studio to do recordings, and studios are expensive to rent because you pay for them by the day or the week. Yeah. And they could just record everything at home and then go mix in the studio. So the big studios were like struggling. And meanwhile, I'm coming out of audio engineering school and go to do an internship I worked at a recording studio in New York City, and it was just like an endless flow of these interns looking for work. And I just work unpaid for 6 months and hoping for something to happen, and nothing happened. So in the meantime, like I ended up working with a friend of mine who did film production, and he ended up teaching me how to make commercials and edit video, and kind of the production process of going through script writing all the way to the final product, post-production, and ended up working at some TV stations making commercials. And then as the internet grew and everyone needed a video for their website, animation became kind of like a popular way for businesses to get video content up, and it's just sort of been booming ever since. There's no lack of people that need video right now. So
yeah, no, that's interesting. Commercials are so interesting too. Maybe we can get into that later, but I find them so fascinating.
Commercials are really interesting because like there's a lot of like just the amount of thought and man hours and inspiration that goes into such like a Nike commercial or something, like whether you agree with it or not, or whether it turns out good or not, they're little experiments in sort of storytelling and narrative and creating moods and images and styles. And so yeah.
Well, and commercials are so interesting too. Before the digital age came in with filmmaking, when commercials were actually shooting on film, they had crazy budgets for some of those things. It's very interesting.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, they still have giant budgets for some of the stuff, but the
Yeah.
other side of it is that you can do a commercial for almost nothing and it looks as good as the stuff that was done back in the 80s or the 70s.
Yeah. It definitely shifted a lot of things. But well, thanks. Yeah. Thanks for the intro. And I guess we can kind of pivot. We've already started talking before we recorded. So
I know.
some of this might be it's always the good stuff never ends up on the recording, right? It's before or after. But yeah, I asked you to come on because I'm interested in exploring sort of storytelling and its place in the world, particularly when it comes to morality. And this has sort of been on my mind because I've been thinking a lot about the Western frame and how much it puts an emphasis on the rational, where we look to science, evidence, logic to help us come to answers about the way we live our lives. And it's lovely lip service. But to me, it doesn't seem like that's actually how we live. It seems like the story is far more powerful and effective than the evidence itself. And when you power those two things together, you can create something super powerful if you can tell the right story. But even looking at evidence and science, to me, it seems like there's this game of taking data points and weaving a story out of them, as opposed to just strictly showing what is objectively true by the use of raw data. And
for sure.
And so let's start there and see what your thoughts are. That I have more that I kind of want to pull out too. But
well, there's a trend in marketing that, I mean, it's more than a trend. Basically, all of marketing is data driven. They want customer data. And even if the data is customer data is so messy, like you don't have clean data sets there. It's a mess. But anyway, but as soon as you get it down to a spreadsheet, it looks like it's clean and organized and stuff. And then people start making decisions based on that, which is a whole different problem. But people in advertising and marketing, they're so wrapped up in sort of this data stuff. And then they try to then use that to sort of craft design narrative around that. And it's propaganda. I mean, that's how I feel about it. I don't like it. I don't think it works really. I think there's I don't have anything against data. Like it's just information that you can that may be useful, because you may need to know something about your customers or the viewers or your audience that may be useful to know. But to craft something towards that, it usually ends up feeling mechanical and manipulative.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, it's because something else, which it'd be something like enchantment, or someone in the process who was actually creative inputted something in there that was true or beautiful in a sense beyond the scope of the intended purpose of the advertisement. And smart advertisers will know about this whole thing. So there's a whole sort of or smart agency people, like these people working in these ad agencies. Right. The dumb ones will just use the data and try to manipulate it. The smart ones know that they have to like use the data as something to then point to something, I would say, more beautiful. And so those would be something like, Nike's does a really good job at that on a pretty regular basis, just creating something that has like a something that sort of, there's a quality about it that you can't quantify.
Yeah, it's hard to put into words.
and they're basically they're making all they're achieving all their goals with as they're achieving their goals that they want as their data is showing, but they're also doing something a lot more, which is they're creating sort of this, that's the whole brand thing and the whole
Right.
narrative thing that they're creating.
Like Apple did that really well too, and they continue to
Mhm.
do that, where it's like their phones haven't changed for how many years, yet there's something about the brand
Right.
and the lifestyle that they created with the images of their marketing that outperforms other things on the market. Like I remember when Microsoft had phones and those things, I loved them. They were
Yeah.
they were so much more user friendly. There were so many benefits to them.
Mhm.
But they had such terrible marketing.
I know.
Like,
I had a Windows phone.
yeah, I liked it. And the problem was the app programmers wouldn't program apps for them.
Yeah.
That was a big part of it too, but probably because they didn't gain this like but my dad worked for Microsoft. And so we had all these products. Like we had the Zunes, we had
Mhm.
the Windows phones, and
Yeah.
I would use them, and I was like, the Zunes were actually really
No, the
awesome,
Zunes are cool.
but they had such terrible marketing. I remember even as a
I
kid,
know.
I was like 15 or something, and I'm watching this Zune commercial, and I was like, what is this? Nobody even knows what this is, but like they could transfer songs. They had
Yeah.
such clean participation. Everybody makes fun of, oh, the Zune. It was like, it's really hard because we were sold this story that, PCs, they're schmucks. Anything that comes from
Yeah.
Microsoft is lame.
Yeah.
And it's very effective.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. Steve Jobs really got the whole, like, why are people buying this? They don't care about what it does or how it does it. He's like, I want to get to the reason why people want to use our product. And then kind of that's design driven from the user experience all the way to the aluminum shell on the laptop. And it's
Yeah.
all thought through. And Microsoft is always, they've been good at making things that work, and then terrible at like figuring out why people want to use them and like what drives them to buy, which
Well,
is hilarious because they have so much money and they could hire anyone, but there's something like inherent within Microsoft. And I'm a Windows guy.
yeah.
I don't have Mac. So, but
Well, that's where I think too, when you were kind of talking about that, where it's like the data driven versus the recognition of something else. Like that's what it seems to me when you said that, where it's like Apple is all about aesthetics and the way things look and creating a lifestyle. And not to say that all Apple products are bad, like they're fine. They're good.
no, they're
Some of them are
fine.
good, but there's this thing that they've done with their marketing that it does seem like that, where it's like they understood the power of beauty and aesthetics and lifestyle and creating something that grasps people in their intuition and not their head. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
PC, it is more that data and that calculation.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and yeah, so I don't know. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. And then there's people that'll be like I'll, you get talking about PC versus Mac, and then I'll usually say something like, I can do everything on a PC, but it costs me like half the price of a Mac. I can even have a better PC and I'm still not spending that much money. And then people are like, well, I'm just like, it's just smarter to use use a PC. But then like I'm playing into the whole narrative because I'm like, I'm smarter than you. I'm like, you got duped.
Do the math.
Whatever. Yeah, do the
Follow the
math.
data.
Right. So yeah, that's funny.
No, and well, I remember when they did the I'm a PC campaign.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably their best marketing campaign that they'd ever done.
I can't remember that.
Well, because they had that. So you remember the Mac had those commercials of like, "Hi, I'm a Mac and
Oh
I'm a
yeah,
PC,"
yeah.
and they always made the PC like this really dorky, like terrible thing that's
Yeah, he
always
was
like
he
crapping
was
the
that
bed.
goofy guy with the round glasses and like the
Yeah.
sweater on. And
Yeah. And so Microsoft took that and they did this I'm a PC um commercial set. Well, I'll have to find it and like send it to you. But it was like all of this like diversity of what it is to be like a Windows user, and sort of rebranding that. It ran for a couple of years. It was actually very successful because it was taking that rebranding and playing into what Mac did of like, hey, Apple is cool, or yeah, Macs are cool and slick and smart, and flipping that on its head and recognizing the diversity of what it is to use these things and what the diversity of what their tools could be used for. And it told a story that was different than what we had known before.
Right.
Like that subversion. It was very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I like their what Microsoft has been doing with their Surface campaign, but still, like, it seems like they can't get any traction. Like, what do you do you think? So obviously, Mac's or Apple's ad campaigns have sort of shaped people, but then there's a feedback loop where the people feed back into that, and there's actually like some sort of relationship being built between the Apple users and the company, where there's this constant sort of like, we'll present to you this this designed laptop that will give you this certain lifestyle, and then like as they adopt the lifestyle, they like through data or whatever, they provide feedback to the company of what they're doing, and then the advertising kind of feedbacks on itself. And I don't know, I guess I just don't know enough about that to, but those feedback loops are interesting, thinking of them as kind of their own things, because Apple has definitely sort of crafted their own sort of market and user base, because people that like Apple really like Apple, and they're just,
from what I understand, they started really early of making their customers feel special and like they were in some club, right? Like that's why you get the stickers with all your Apple products, because they want it to become part of your identity, and they started really early. And that's something that creates these loyal fanatic fans, and why people will stand, and not much anymore, but like before, they'd stand in line for hours.
I remember,
to get the new phone, even though they bought the new one a year ago or what,
right.
And so there's this, they created this mentality. And I think other companies have tried to bridge onto that and use different sources of media and the way that shapes people to reprogram. Like I remember for a while, Microsoft kept doing all of these promotion deals with TV shows where it's like, oh, they all have Windows phones and they've got the Microsoft Surfaces and all this stuff to kind of, soft propaganda to get people to think, oh, hey, maybe I should use that because that's cool. But I think it was too late, because at that point they recognized, at least to a point, what they were doing.
Yeah.
There was another narrative sold to them that this was the thing. And so they could recognize it enough where it didn't quite work, I think, the way they thought it would.
Yeah. They're always sort of playing catch up against Apple. Dang those Apple guys.
well, the hard thing is too, it's not this recipe of success that you can look at a data sheet and know it. Like there's an element of timing, there's an element of creative understanding and nuance that doesn't come from a data sheet. And anybody who works in the arts know, like, you can have the best idea for the film that seems like a jackpot, but it's all kind of Vegas. There's so many different factors that come into those things that affect the way something becomes viral. And
Right.
You can certainly play into some things, but I think you get too caught up in that game of, if you get too caught up in that game of creating an image of something to get that success, you lose sight of creating something that's valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think, even though Microsoft's marketing has been pretty terrible as a whole, why do
Mm-hmm.
they survive? Well, they do create something valuable.
Yeah.
And so it stands, and their marketing's good enough to know that, but it's two very different approaches to the way that became successful and marketed. And it seems like
Right.
Apple was always interested in aesthetics, like the
Yeah, for sure.
colorful computers, the commercials.
Single mouse button.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
they went with that for a while. Do you remember? They just had one button on their mouse, and it was like, and PC had two, and people were like, "Why don't you add a second button?" They're like, "No, it's too much." Just like, all right.
Yeah.
But it was those kind of things that actually made people like them, because they're just like, yeah, let's do this. Let's there, because I mean that's one thing about like any sort of design or storytelling or anything, is that you have to have constraints. If you don't have any constraints, you don't have any necessary design or whatever. So like when I have a project, I'll get a whole brand guide, and the brand guide is basically just telling me, here's the logo, here's how you can use it, here's how you can't use it. It like just sets up here's the colors you can use, here's the color palettes that you can use, here's the types of imagery you can use. It's basically all these rules. It's like a set of rules for you to create in. And if all you do is you follow the rules exactly, and you're just like, well, I followed the rules exactly, they're like, yeah, but the thing you made sucks still. Like, you still have to do something creative. Like, it's not just good enough to be like, well, I didn't break rules in your style guide. It's like you need to create something that moves, or that has some life to it, that has some sort of creative element in it. And and you can't, that I mean, that's about as much direction as I get sometimes. They're like, here's the rules, now do something creative. And then if I make something terrible, they say, this doesn't look good, and then they start nitpicking it, when they should have just said, this isn't creative, you should actually put some more life into it. Because you can't articulate some of this stuff. So like in the process of like creating like a commercial, and I've been thinking about this for a while now. Normally commercials are okay. So I'm working on like low to medium budget things. I'm not working on like, I'm not at a huge agency working on Coca-Cola ads. And if I was, I would be doing like this much of the project. So I'm like taking on whole projects that are like low, medium budget things. Whereas like a Coca-Cola ad will have like, $150,000 budget, and there'll be 30, 40 people on the team, and they'll all have different roles, and they'll be, anyway. So I'm taking on like entire projects. Sometimes they'll provide a script or whatever. And so I get to kind of be a part of the whole process, I guess what I'm just trying to say. But the whole process starts on these kind of low budget things in script writing. So you're like, all right, let's get it down on paper. Let's write a script. Usually it consists of a voiceover. So they'll have two columns. One will be the voiceover, which is like narration or whatever is being said in the commercial, if there's dialogue or whatever. And then on the other side, it'll be like what we want to see on screen. They'll write out like, we want to show two people in a house, or a car driving down the street, or an icon of a business. So, and I've been thinking like, we started out, I feel like for a lot of stuff, that's the wrong place to start. because it's really interesting because like we'll you get these people and they're talented copywriters, so talented writers, talented people that know how to craft words and whatever, but they don't know how to make something visual. So I'll receive a script. The copywriting is great. So there'll be a narration. It'll be like a minute long video. The narration will be really good. It'll have all the points that they want to get to. It'll be in a logical order. It'll, they're like introducing da 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 da. It'll be it the type of text that you would want on a nice print ad or on your website or whatever. It doesn't work for video.
Right.
And sometimes it works, or we make it work. It's fine.
Yeah.
But compare that to when you do something like it, and usually compare that to like if you take what the music first. So this is really interesting because this is what Disney did in his early cartoons. And the reason why they did it is because they didn't have the ability to really record voices and stuff. So like all the early cartoons were just set to music. So that's why they're called, there's like Silly Symphonies, and then Warner Brothers had Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies. It's because everything was set to music, because the music kind of drove the animation. And like people don't realize how integral music was to the invention of animation, and as it developed through the early 20s all the way up through the 50s, 60s. Music drove everything, the pacing, the rhythms. Like the reason why you like watching a Bugs Bunny cartoon or whatever is because it's not just the design, let's say the aesthetic design of how it sits on screen, although that's part of it, but it's also the rhythm and how it moves. It's the pacing of like how of the order things happen. So for example, like something boring will just happen at a pace like da 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 da, like so imagine a visual coming up and there's one, another one, another one, another one, another one. All right, so it's kind of boring. What that we're compare it to like a character or something coming out and goes da 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 da, something like that, whereas like all of a sudden there's a life to it that wasn't there before, and it's done entirely through pacing and rhythm. And so for early cartoonists, they just listened to the music because they already had an idea of what was interesting music, and interesting music doesn't go da da da. There's like a rhythm to music, especially like the music they were using in the cartoons. So like this idea of rhythm, it isn't ever considered in the script writing process. So they're, for example, they'll have the copy written, which is good copy, but it never gets read out loud, or if it does, they're not paying attention to the rhythm of how it starts. So that would be like whereas like I've done this before with other scripts where I'll find the music first, and then I'll actually write the script to the music. And it gets complicated because like if I have to make, because there'll be some copywriter at the company or someone in charge of marketing, and I'm never happy with them because they'll be like, oh, we got to fit this in there. We got to cram this phrase in there because this is a phrase we've used in our ad campaign, and we got to make sure that it's also here. And when we mention this, we've got to put in this reference here about this, and this is the phrase we have to use. And it's totally it's unmusical, it's whatever. And I mean, I complain about it, but it ends up being another restriction that like I have to be creative to find a solution for. And that's why I constantly have to remind myself, like, the first reaction is anger, and then I'm like, all right, let's figure this out and figure out how to make it work. And usually it works fine. But this idea of so like if I do music first, then sort of craft the script to it, it makes all the script changes like 10 times more painful, because I have to re-edit all the music again. And sometimes like it doesn't really recover. Like I had it in a place that I thought was really good, and now it's in an okay place, and probably okay is good enough. It's better than if it was done another way. But that's like an example of like rhythm. It is an intuitive thing that you feel, and you can think about it, because you can be aware of it and sort of name it, and then experiment and be intentional about it. But it's one of those things that people don't realize is affecting them when they're seeing a commercial or seeing something visual, or even just hearing something, hearing an ad, or a piece of music or whatever.
Well, and as an audio person, you probably know this better than anyone else, but the best sort of sound designer or composer, what have you, that their best job or the best compliment they can have is that nobody says anything.
Right.
If you don't notice the sound, if you don't notice the music, they've done an excellent job.
Right.
And so it's so thankless. But it's that thing, if something's off with those things, people will notice, but they won't know why. And they'll and so that there's just this power to the way that you blend those arts together. And that's why I think film as a medium has grasped so many people and has been sort of the top tier medium of artistic expression, at least by consumers lately, because it adds everything together. You have images, you have music, you have dialogue, you have, and even with the dialogue, it's not just about good writing, it's that lyrical sense.
That pacing.
Why does everybody love Aaron Sorkin dialogue? Because there's something musical to it. And you always have those people complaining, like, nobody talks about that in real life. And we're like, we know. They're not supposed to. It's an art form. There's something very intriguing about it, in a sense. And so there's this, and all of these are different parts of aestheticism, or even just knowledge and acknowledgement of something beautiful. And you can, if the best filmmakers can find the teams to weave those all things together to where you don't even notice they're all weaved together, and they have this incredible impact in shaping people and the way they see the world and what they think is important. And I think that's particularly true with commercials. Like the best commercials shape you and change the idea of what you think is valuable and moral and worth pursuing, and get you to buy into this idea of whatever they are offering and can give you that.
Yeah. Well, that weaving together is almost sort of what I would say is like the definition of what is beautiful. It's something that has like a million things going on that all work together towards who knows what. That's what, like, it's something you behold. It's not something you can necessarily grasp. And so even when you get into like, and this, like when you get into film studies and you start like looking at scenes and you start dissecting like what's happening in the music track, and also the dialogue, and then also the framing and the pacing of the edits, and how that all works together. Like you can dissect that, but like like try to go recreate that. It's so difficult. Like even after you've dissected, like you could dissect every movie, and it will help you because you'll start to get a sense of it. But trying to recreate that, trying to weave something together like that is extremely, extremely difficult. And like you said, like when you're viewing something, if you notice, the music, or you notice the dialogue or whatever, and it takes you out of it, that's a problem. And so it's when you don't notice anything is when you're like, oh, this just makes sense. And then but it gives you the illusion that this is just natural, that this is something easy. It's just like, so like when I said, like, I had the realization that I didn't know what a story was. Part of the realization was like I couldn't write a story. I still don't know if I could write a good story. I haven't, like, but like I'm trying to understand stories, because like if you can build in yourself the ability to weave a bunch of stuff together, then you can make something beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's really what I want to do. I want to be able to make stuff all work together. And so like that's why I get angry at the copywriters for jacking everything up with their
Well,
good copy.
it's like that you see something they can't in a certain way, where it's like, and they're doing the same thing, right? They see something you
Yep.
can't. And so it's
Mhm.
learning how to weave those things. And especially when you're being hired by a company to sell something, it's far different than creating something more creative without that certain purpose.
Yeah.
There is something very powerful about the way to weave ideas, thoughts, beliefs into art in this magnificent way, where people feel like it's a revelation versus a propaganda. But that in
Mhm.
itself is an incredible power to be wielded very cautiously, because that in itself can create, the greatest propaganda is the most beautiful, that seems the most natural. And
Mhm.
that's where I think for me, I've really started questioning this idea of what are movies doing to us in the face of our moral landscape. Because it's easy to say, oh, we can, like Sam Harris would say, I can get my moralities from science, I can get my moralities from rational reasoning, which
Mhm.
there's questions about that on a philosophical level from like a materialistic frame, but I won't kind of go
Yeah.
into that. But I think for me it's sort of, I don't know, I kind of want to call BS on it all, because like, as much as you can say, yeah, science tells me what I believe and I follow the evidence to get where my morals come from, it's like, your moral, show me the 5 friends that you hold closest, the 5 movies that you think are the most important, and the
Mhm.
5, musical artists that you listen
Albums.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, 5 albums. I think I'm going to get a better sense of why you believe what you believe and what your morality is
Mm.
than, you know, even what family you come from. It has such
Right.
this power to shape. And I think it is because it used aesthetics to forward its messaging.
Yeah, and that gets into the question, can beauty lie to you?
Mm.
And here's what I don't think beauty ever lies. Okay. That being said, you can use beauty to lie to people.
Yes.
But the beauty itself doesn't lie.
No. You got to
So
explain
like,
that though. People are going to get real triggered. I'll let you take
right.
that one.
Well,
I agree with you, but
this well, okay. People are afraid of being bullshitted, right?
yes.
So they are afraid of being tricked. And
Mm-hmm.
this is why we've gone down this rationalist road and the scientific road, is because we want empirical, and we want the evidence to to um to rely upon. We want and yes, we do. Like we don't, if the evidence isn't adding up, like let's definitely take a look at it.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't provide any. Well, let me back up. There's like a narrow trying to thread a needle here.
No one.
Okay, so
the people against this are never going to be happy with whatever answer.
yeah,
but
for sure.
That's the beauty of I think this view is that it allows for that exploration, and I think you play it long enough, you can see it. But
yeah, so like, all right, what's it? I'm trying to think of like an advertising example. Okay, so like, it's like when advertisers use sex to sell. So they're using
Carl's Jr.
yeah, like Carl's Jr. There's an example of using it's so over the top, it's hard to call it beauty. What's a I wish there was a better example. But like
yeah, there's something to the aesthetic beauty, right? Because I think we can agree, like the female form, like, but even the male form, there's something about the form of humans we find beautiful, and whether you over sexualize it or not, like
right.
there's something, as humans, we're drawn to the beauty of the human form. And so you see these marketing and TV and music use that knowledge, take it to its extreme, and say, well, if we can package all of this into this thing, like, it'll trick them into thinking
into buying a burger. Right. And that's an example of and that's an example of using beauty to then get someone to do something else. So using a beautiful model to sell a hamburger. Now that was using beauty to lie to you, basically saying, like, if you eat this burger, somehow you'll end up with this woman. Yeah, with the right.
or the fact that they eat those burgers anyways is
right. Right. But it, and they're even doing it they're realizing that.
Yes.
And that's part of the whole shtick. But the beauty of the person doesn't lie. Like that woman in her humanity is beautiful, even when she's and even there's a problem with over sexualizing things, but the sexuality of people is a beauty that is ultimately creative. Like, you know what I mean? Like, like it's actually leading towards something actually creative, toward creating other people. And what's more beautiful than that? Like it's
yeah, it's
so
I don't want to say
but it's using
creative, but
yeah, it is literally creative. But when Carl's Jr. uses that to sell a burger, like, it's sort of this like we get it, it's kind of silly and whatever, and we'll buy their hamburger anyway. And they're trying to, I don't eat there, but
I don't either. But no, there's something to this idea where we recognize intuitively there's something about beauty that draws us. And that's why we have beautiful people being actors. Like Brad Pitt would not have had the career he had if there wasn't something aesthetically beautiful about him. But he also wouldn't have gone so far if there wasn't something internally beautiful about the way he can embody people.
Yep.
Like there's something going on here where, and this is where I think people get lost in this idea of beauty, where because we are in such a materialistic culture and such a visual culture, the only type of beauty we immediately recognize is visual. And it's the easiest one to sort of intuitively recognize. But I think if you dig deeper, you recognize there's something about this weaving that you were talking about that adds to the full picture.
Yeah, but even like the most beautiful women in our culture are also immensely talented. Like
often.
often, like, Kim Kardashian gets a lot of flack for being just an image, but she's proven herself to be very smart, like as far as like marketing and connecting with a certain audience and and creating products that people want to buy, and that I don't
She's
know
great
about.
at brand building
Yeah,
of
and
some
so
kind.
compare that to like the random Instagram model that looks similar to her, that doesn't she doesn't know what she's doing. She's like posting pictures of herself on Instagram. Why isn't she as big as Kim Kardashian? Well, there's all sorts. It's
Yeah.
more complicated than just Kim Kardashian's also smart, because um did you ever hear what was it, Joe Rogan's bit about OJ Simpson and because Kim Kardashian's dad represented OJ Simpson
Yeah.
in the trial, and that's what brought them to fame. And like, he has this whole bit about how if OJ Simpson wasn't the all-time leading rusher, we wouldn't have Kim Kardashian wouldn't be popular or something. It's hilarious.
I'll
But
have to watch that. That's interesting. I mean, yeah, there's some truth to that. Although, well, no, he's probably right.
yeah, well, that whole bit is just weaving all that together, being like showing how everything works, and like it's a beautiful thing. But we admire people that have something to them. We can fixate on the visual because we are visual creatures, so that it's almost like we're just like, of course it's all visual, but it's not. We intuit things, and there's people that will kind of gain popularity and then they just fade away quickly because there was nothing to them, or maybe there was something to them, but um but
It's really complicated because I think for some fields, the aesthetic beauty is more of an asset than another, right? Modeling, being an actress, those sort of things. There's a reason why there's the joke, well, you got a face for radio, right? Because
right.
there with mediums that don't require you being in front of a camera, like if there's not at least some sort of intuitive sense of a beautiful image that our culture thinks is beautiful, you're gonna have a really hard time succeeding. Although people are trying to break that model where we take non-conforming people and trying to make them models and change the standard. But even then, there's still a beauty to a lot of those people that they're using. It's a different type of aestheticism.
Yeah.
But it's not
Yeah.
complete.
Yeah, because I saw a post about there was a plus size model, and then people were complaining because she had a flat stomach, even though she was like a larger than the typical model. And they're like, no one has a stomach that flat. Like, well, she does. And they're like, that's the reason why she was chosen. We need more diversity other than just flat stomach models. And then there was a post with a girl who didn't have a flat stomach, but she had like a narrow waist. And they're like, we need more diversity, just not narrow waisted. And it's just like, holy crap.
The target's always moving. And I mean, I can be sympathetic to that sense where the 90s version of beautiful women that we had was not actually a healthy version. Jennifer Aniston, Courtney Cox, all of these very teeny tiny
Super
women
thin.
were not healthy. They were not eating enough. They were not. And how many models, actresses have, even actors have eating disorders, have body dysmorphia problems. That's something about the narrative that I think we do lose a sense of it because it's not the thing that's up front. It's oh, look how beautiful they are, but we don't we don't see the constant pressure that they go through of always being told they're not skinny enough, they're not beautiful
Mm-hmm.
enough, and it's not actually this altogether beautiful life because there's too much pressure on the visual aesthetics. I mean, I don't know. I think we can look at people in our lives. The most beautiful people we see in our day to day are not always the ones who are the most aesthetically beautiful. In fact, sometimes you can see a beautiful person and you get to know them and their character makes their visual appearance a little less beautiful, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's this idea of like beauty is not just about the eye.
Mm-hmm. But there is something about like trying to get that initial attention,
Mhm.
like that. So that's why you'd want someone to be attracted. That's why you don't want to look. Well, it's also why people want to act ugly too, is get that initial attention.
Well, it depends on it depends on your field, right? Like for women
Mm-hmm.
who work as lawyers, like why was Legally Blonde funny? Because there's a truth that women who are in a field that is more masculinely dominated, where you have to be taken seriously, are far more often going to wear muted colors, nothing
Mm-hmm.
fluffy or girly, because they want to be taken seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something cueing us the visual aesthetic where it's not always valuable for women to be feminine. And there's something in the stories that we're telling where it's encouraging that as well.
Yeah. And then we're back into one of those feedback loops where, you know, where the media can feed back into the culture, and then the culture feeds back in the media, and it can create these unhealthy things where, you know, like you were saying in the 90s, where all the girls are trying to be super thin with low-rise jeans or whatever, and is like, I look back at everyone looks so ridiculous, like
But we're going to look back in 20 years from now and think everybody looked ridiculous. Like there's something about trying to placate to the modern aesthetic that's always going to be outdated the minute we form to it.
yeah. But then there's also there's always the return back to the aesthetic of 20 or 30 years ago, like
Mm-hmm.
like because in the 90s the whole thing was going back to the 70s. It was like flowy or crop tops, flowy stuff, and then like almost not bell bottom jeans,
Yeah.
boot cut at least. And it was um so there's this nostalgia of 20 years ago while also condemning what happened 10 years ago, or nostalgia for 30 years ago or whatever,
Well,
because those trends come back.
it's like
It's
when
fun.
Paul, I don't know if you watched that video, but Paul on Movies, where he's talking about the member berries from South
Yeah.
Park. It's
Member?
the member berries of fashion, right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, fashion sucks. Let's go back and remember when we had bell bottoms.
Mm-hmm.
remember, and
Yeah.
it's very natural for us to look back and try to reclaim things, and we're basically repurposing the things that came before to help us move forward in the future and find ways to put new spins on things.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if maybe some of that too is just access to better archiving technologies with the internet, where we have better ways of seeing what came in the 80s.
Yeah.
Because we have
We're
all
kind
of
of keeping like a cultural memory.
Mm-hmm. And so that didn't exist the same ways previously. But I think in some ways it's adding to some of these problems too, of the hypersexualization of our culture and the way that affects. I mean, because fashion trends, if we're honest, fashion trends have been like forwarded and changed and affected by um, the sex worker industry far more than anything else, at least modern fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Like for a long time. And obviously there's a conversation to be had about that, and the place in which, sexuality within our expressions is valid or appropriate. But there's something about that aestheticism, and it almost, as I'm talking about it, almost sort of maybe pointing to this idea of vulnerability, of us trying to find a visual way to um, allow a space for vulnerability when we've lost how to do that, um, sort of in other ways. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's almost like the illusion of vulnerability,
Yeah.
because I mean the stripper is someone who's like taking off that which protects them, like being vulnerable, but we all know that strippers are not vulnerable emotionally or vulnerable necessarily, like usually, like, or maybe that's just a
Or they're more, in some ways, they're more vulnerable than they portray, because there's something about this sexy, empowering woman trope that has become such a powerful force in the shaping of young women in our society, especially with the access to those things in a way that we never really had before the internet, and before the way media blew up and the way things became more gray in
well,
expression.
do you think it's more like the desire for power, and then that's a way for women to have power because it's something inherent that they can, so just as a guy may rely on his strength or his sort of work prowess or whatever, a woman could rely on her sexuality because it does work. It is a
Yeah.
sense, it is something powerful within women, and so being able for her to use it towards her own whatever she wants, then but isn't that like just sort of that desire for power to be able to control your um your world and your life, and
Mm.
and then you know TV and film and stuff, I think plays into that because it, unlike other times in history, the visual image can be just like multiplied and displayed.
Yeah.
So if you have a powerful image, like that will naturally just propagate through the technology. um I don't know.
Well, there definitely is a power to it. Um, but there's this double-edged sword, right? Because the strongest, most powerful things in this world are also the things most easily corrupted and
Yeah.
corruptible. And so it's not only the corruption of relationship in men, but I think it's also a corruption of I, I worry for the women who buy into sort of that model and use that as this empowering, because I think it opens the door for them to put themselves in places that are losing a power too.
Right, where they end up being disempowered because of it.
Right. Well, because
That
as much as I don't agree that, what you were wearing is a reason to have any unsolicited sexual encounters, you have to recognize that there are going to be some people, depending on the way that you
yeah,
dress, take that as a visual cue that you want something that maybe you don't. And that,
yeah,
and there's obviously a big conversation about how we communicate things and how we create safety and boundaries. But there's this door where I don't think you can not acknowledge that, like, whether it's right or not, people are going to think you're communicating something that you might not be.
yeah.
And many people will not act on it, but there are some who will. And that's a really
Those people are
scary
not
thing,
good.
especially for children. And children nowadays, like, they see all of these images of these sexy women on billboards and think that's what men want. And that's what women should want to be, and it's empowering. And certainly there is a power to it. But it
Mhm.
also comes to, where is that power best used in its right context. And obviously, I think for a Christian framework, there's something to the idea of a covenant relationship in that expression of those things.
Yeah.
That creates the safety and the power for both men and women to harness that well. But
Yeah.
there's something in the media that I think is a huge factor in changing the game on sexuality, the way we see it working in so many levels. And that's where it's been the biggest sort of door for me to recognize the power of morality shaping in media, because there's just this story that's being told that's leaving out a lot of details, leaving out a lot of the complications of what that means. And so we take those stories and see them as true, even in their narrative sense, and we live those out because we think that's what we should. And I don't think we've begun to see the consequences of that on our societies. It's just starting.
What do you think? I mean, obviously the sort of the hypersexualization is a story we're telling ourselves, that we're not sort of realizing the consequences for. But I don't know, it seems to me that like people do tell the other side of it, but it's not interesting. So people, it's more interesting to be like, oh, I could go out there and I could, if I do this, I can get that. And then there's this person that's already tried that and they've seen the downsides, and they say, I don't know, it didn't seem like it was worth it to me. This is what happened to me and it was terrible. But then to the person who's driven and just are like, no, I'm going to get that. I'm going to do that it's the whole, it's trying to manipulate the world rather than sort of be in harmony with it. And it seems like that always comes back. But I feel like the story is being told, but people are just like, you're moralizing, or but we are seeing it come back, because like it used to be, as far as sexuality, like anything goes. And then people are like, oh, that's not good, because ends up that all these girls are getting raped and abused. And sorry, my phone started ringing.
No, it's
and
fine.
So they're like, all right, we need to establish something about consent. Like, so if we establish these rules about consent, then we'll have a framework in which these types of abuses won't work. And then I even saw on Twitter, there was an article about how consent is not enough. That there has to be, I forget what the argument was, but we're already seeing that like there's this risk that people are willing to take, and there's all these problems with it. And then when the problems get told, that I don't know.
Well, I think why we're seeing this pull back now is where people lived out that narrative and are feeling the consequences of it. So now they're recognizing, oh, hey, we've got to rethink this. I mean, you look at it in Hollywood, Time's Up. You have this movement to try and create a better place for women in entertainment, which I'm very for. But I think what we also have to look at is how many films in the 90s were men treating women like absolute sexual objects for their own pleasure. And
because that's how those movies were produced.
Yeah, well, you're right. Like we expect something different. It doesn't surprise me. And so there's that rule where it's like, you especially look up in the stand-up world or the comedy world with Louis C.K. It's like, well, I think what he did was disgusting. But if your rule is consent only, you have a hard time.
The rules.
You have a hard time arguing that. Like now we're changing the rules, and like obviously there's much more complication to that. And I don't want to minimize the uncomfortability that women feel in those situations, because I think it is more complicated than just
because like Zizek makes this point, but it's made to ridiculous levels with this Louis C.K. example. But even asking for consent is sometimes traumatic for the person because you're just like, all right, I better just ask. And if they say no, then no. And then yes, then let's go. But there's all this middle ground that was never addressed between, like, is this appropriate to ask consent?
Mm-hmm.
And is this like, oh.
Yeah, it's far more complicated than we want to admit, and that's where it's like you're starting to see those consequences, and that's where these narratives are shifting, where they're trying to find, we're trying to design a way where we can have our cake and eat it too. And
Right.
I think there is a value to recognizing it's not just about yourself anymore, right? Like, because that was the narrative, right? I'm not hurting anybody but myself. And so, it's just between me and this person, where it's like, well, we can look at the science and we can say that women and men, but more particularly women, experience negative mental health traumas more frequently if they've been involved in casual sexual encounters. It has a mental health effect, and that not only affects themselves but the people around them, and there's ripple effects into the community. And we can look at the way that the aesthetic game that's being played on Instagram, Facebook, social media, magazines are having negative mental health effects on women. And I'm sure it's men too, but I think women are more affected by a lot of those things in a certain way, and more I think a lot of women are probably more in tune with their emotions than men are, so they can express it more. But it's like, we can't say that it doesn't affect anybody but them, and then it's take it even to a bigger view, this idea of reproduction and the right to decide what we do. Well, reproduction, what did Peterson say? Like, more 50% of women over 30 have no children. Well, where's our responsibility to continue the human race on this materialistic frame, right? Don't we have some responsibility to, if our only objective is to propagate our DNA, don't we have some responsibility to talk about what our responsibility is in that process? And this is obviously more complicated, but it's
because there's the whole narrative in the environmental side of things where they're just like, no, it's my responsibility not to have more kids because people destroy the earth. And they're just like that. You're just like, all right,
well, that's
I guess.
Well, that's where I think you lose validity with the ability of morality strictly coming from science and rational positions, because you can rationalize your position in so many ways. And the truth is, we don't, as much as it can help us get a clearer understanding, we don't really know the implications of our actions in the world. And the arrogance to think that we do, and that we can use all of that to come to a place, I think stops us from actually living a better life that we intuitively feel, and that we intuitively see from beauty. And I think this goes back to your point of, like, beauty doesn't deceive, because when we get bullshitted, it's not the lack of beauty that is what stopped us from seeing something, right? It's taking a piece of beauty and letting that shine first to hide the darkness of the thing that's behind it. And true beauty, when we see it, shines brighter than the thing that isn't full. But like, you have to use beauty to trick, because it's the most effective way of doing so.
Yeah.
And like, there's something so powerful and beautiful about good storytelling. And I think we are losing it a little bit. We've lost a sense of what storytelling is, and why it's effective.
It reminds me of like Peterson. He's been for years collecting that that old Soviet propagandic art,
which
and
which is actually
which
funny,
is weird.
Well, Kind of, but I also, have you ever watched any Soviet Union like black and white films and the things they
Uh,
produce? It's crazy. Some of the, like, especially in editing, what the Soviet Union provided to like the techniques of filmmaking, they're
really?
fascinating. There's some of like the most interesting, beautiful things, but that's there's a truth where it's like that's why it was so powerful, because they harness this beauty in it. Um,
Yeah, and he talks about how like there'll be like a propaganda poster or a painting that was meant to do something specific. It had a propagandic purpose, and it was, using the art to manipulate or to shape this thing. But he's like, it's interesting to see that fade in time, and the beauty that was in it come forth. So there was like, you could think of it as like there's an archetypal thing in the painting that comes out once you slowly forget sort of the manipulative thing that was trying to be done.
mm,
So like that's the way in which uh beauty can be used to trick, but the beauty itself doesn't lie. There's still goodness and truth in it.
right.
And it, so in some way it's being used as like a tool to manipulate, but it's also hidden. And
Mm-hmm.
you have to have eyes to see, and you have to be able to seek it and 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 pay attention in a specific way, and not be allowed um to uh don't allow it to do whatever, manipulative thing they're trying to do to you. um and
Easier
it's
said than done.
right. But I think that's why, like, these kind of things take practice to
Mm,
be able to see those things. Like, how do you have to practice seeing things in that way.
right.
Otherwise you'll always be tricked by the superficial. um you'll always be fooled. And so you have to train yourself to to um to see the beauty for what it is. And yeah, like I said, easier said than done. But I think that's that's a different way of approaching the world than sort of rationalism or truth first.
Yeah.
So that would be like, no, I want the facts, and then I'll entrust myself to this experience or whatever once I have a rational basis for it.
Mm,
Because you know it the truly beautiful and truly meaningful things in life, you never have a rational basis for going into it. So like
right.
going into a, like, let's say a long-term relationship where you're going to start a family. Now there's like, all right, people have done this before. I this has been successful at some level. And um I'm people seem to, yeah, people have done it, so I know it's possible. Like, it's not like I have no rational basis at all for family or whatever. But you don't know. Like, you don't
Can never know.
know. And this is how it is with life. And if you're always waiting for certainty on some sort of rational level, you never get anywhere.
You wouldn't
And
get
you
out of
never get
bed.
right. Well, and yeah, you just stay in bed and look at your phone and uh try to get the little pleasures that you can without risking too much. um
Well, and
Order some stuff off Amazon.
I I'm interested to know your opinion on this because I've been thinking about it a lot. I feel like part of this issue of good storytelling and the way that, and what we're, a lot of people feel like we're missing in the modern movies, is this rationality first mentality. And I think it also exists in sort of um, like a religious sphere too, like the Christian
Hmm.
movies that we see,
Yeah.
where it's like we have
They're
to
the
get,
worst.
well, because we have to get the truth out first, and
Yeah.
then the beauty and the aesthetics that'll follow. We'll use that as like a bow on top instead of looking at the beautiful first.
Hmm.
And so what do we get? We get sermons on both sides of the spectrum, the secular and the religious, wrapped together by aesthetics instead of recognizing people like art because it's beautiful, and the things that last throughout history are not just aesthetically beautiful, they're beautiful throughout. And when we lose sight of this beauty first mentality and switch to truth, we lose sight of what it is to live better stories and create better stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause when you're creating something, if, and this is the problem with some with advertising, is because there's already like an outcome you're trying to achieve. So like,
but there's probably an outcome that people are trying to achieve in the narrative sense too. Like I've been in the room, right? Where it's like, and especially with documentary, and this is why I actually got so fascinated with documentary filmmaking, because we look at it and we think, well, these are just real stories. And so I put on my truth glasses and I watch, and it shapes the way I think. But the truth is, the person who went out and created that story in the way that you see it is because they thought it meant something. They had a reason to do it. That I it's not that is wrong, but it's an incredible power that I don't think enough people really consider what they're doing before they take the step and point their camera at something. Right. But on the flip, it's like our consumers thinking about that too. It's this two-sided issue.
Yeah. I guess it's like, because you have to sort of have some sort of thing you're aiming at, right? And it can't just be totally nebulous, and sometimes when it is totally nebulous, you don't get anywhere. But there's pretty often in the creative process, you'll reach a point where you're like, I kind of want to go this way, but I know that, but rationally thinking, I'm trying to get over here, so I'm not going to follow this rabbit trail. And but usually, like, it's so interesting because like you'll follow this and you'll discover something totally new here that'll like make everything like there's a sense in which you start off on this trail and you're like, I'm gonna have to give this up, probably, this goal I have. And and usually that's when something like truly creative and incredible happens, because usually you get that back some way, and usually it's better and fuller somehow. I don't know if you've had that experience, like where you're like, you're set up making something, you're like, I want this piece of art to show this, or this documentary to speak to this issue, and this is kind of how I think it should be portrayed. And like as you're going along, you're like, it's not going exactly how I thought it was, but still you have to follow that sort of thread into the darkness, so to speak. And then that's where well, I want to say that's where salvation's found, and that's what brings the whole thing together in some sense.
I mean, I don't think any path we take leads us to where we thought we were supposed to be, creative or otherwise. And that's part of the journey, and that recognition of you needed this thing, this false thing,
to get
you moving to a place where you can recognize, hey, this is not the path that I should be. And that's where it's like the fear of being tricked, the fear of pursuing the wrong thing and believing the wrong thing. It's a really valid fear, because what we believe and what we follow shapes us, and it shapes the community, and we all want to put good into the world. I really think the majority of people do. But that's the thing, unless you are living in integrity with yourself and following those things, even if in the face of the fact that you might be being bullshitted.
Yeah.
You're never gonna realize what that is anyways.
Yeah. I mean, in that case, like, being bullshitted is inevitable.
Oh yeah.
And so, like, what do we do in the case of that? Like you have to just, you have to have trust. You have to have like a trust in the transcendent that 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 will carry you forward, that if you move out, there's something there. And then you also have to have trust in yourself, that you're not just, that even if you are deceived, you can self-correct, not even self-correct, but you'll find the right path.
Yeah. And I don't know, I think movies have made it really hard in that too, because
How so?
we constantly see stories that point to the fact that we can't trust the transcendent. And even
Oh,
the
really?
I think, well, it's split, right? I'm sounding a little too doom and gloom, but there's a lot of that where they're coming from a materialistic frame too. And so it's like, did you watch Midnight Mass?
Mm-mm.
My friend Christian told me I should watch it, so I watched it, and it was interesting enough, but it kind of lost itself towards the end, I think. But there's like this whole part of it where, like, I don't want to spoil anything, but
that's the trouble time. I'm like, spoilers.
Well, anyways, you could see the way that they were playing with this idea of the supernatural and the materialistic and the way that things can be explained, and yada yada yada. And I think there's a lot of that within modern media, because nobody wants to seem like superstitious, because obviously we're an idiot to believe in like miracles. Obviously you're an idiot, like it's not natural, right? Obviously.
Right.
But then even in the frame of filmmaking itself, how many special effects come in? How many fantasy stories do we see that shape the idea of what's real and what's not? And so we lose sight of reality too. And I think it adds a distrust to the way we see, especially when you get too deep into this way of the way that movies shape us. We have a distrust of if our instincts even are our instincts, or if they're just manifestations of the things that have been dumped into our brain time and time again. It's like a scary place to be.
Right. But I think that's why you need a deep trust in God, and then realize that God trusts you too. And to sort of press into that relationship between yourself and God, or yourself and the transcendent, however you want to frame it. Like, and you have to, that's a relationship that has to be built, and that's that practice again of, and that's what I would say is part of that, seeing the beauty for as it is, rather than for, it's seen through the thing to what is transcendent about it. So
you just said something super important there, though.
Yeah.
I want to go back because I'm like, it's not only that we have a transcendent and trust in something bigger than us, but like that belief that God also, or the transcendent, trusts us as well.
Yeah.
That right there, it's like, even in modern churches, right? Like,
yeah, church undermines that all the time.
Right. Like, we don't have that trust that God trusts us as well. And this, I mean, look at the Bible, this idea of like wrestling with God, and the way that he allows people to act in the world and uses our mistakes and missteps in the world to bring about his purposes. Like, that's huge. I think that more than just people don't trust the transcendent, because I think we do in different ways, and sometimes we're trusting the wrong transcendent. But we have a real lack of belief in the idea that the transcendent trusts us.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah, for me, that's that's almost everything.
Yeah.
And it, we emphasize how much, so like in church, we emphasize how much we should trust God, but you never hear that, that God trusts you. We emphasize how much we should love God. And well, we do hear how much God loves us, but it's always in sort of this pitiful way, because
Right.
um
Well, and there's so much undermining too of like, you're sinful, you can't trust yourself. And that's why we trust God. But you're missing the point where it's like we trust God and we put our faith in him. So then we can trust ourselves and see that he trusts us and work together in this co-creation of beauty and new life.
yep.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's super right on. And I haven't thought of it
Well,
that way.
yeah, and it gets back to the point where I was saying, like, all right, so you want to go to this point, so you like got your eyes fixed on this. My attention is trying to get here, and then along the way you realize it's not actually going that way, it's going this way. And so you have to you have to give this up in order to start going this direction. And the promise is that you get this back in some other way.
Mm.
So you don't necessarily trust that you have the right goal in mind. You don't necessarily trust that, man, I'm getting emotional talking about this.
I know, I am too.
you can't trust that you're going to get everything right. But you can trust that process that you can make it through.
Yeah.
And that's I mean, that's what I was talking about with Paula with the U-shaped journey. You have to trust that you can make it through that whole process of being bullshitted, going somewhere, losing that which was most valuable to you, and then being able to then go into the darkness and reemerge. And then the benefit, this is all Peterson stuff basically, but the benefit is that you now know all that. And once you've been through that again, this is, for me, this is like dying to self. This is what Christ is talking about when he's saying, like, when he's telling the rich young ruler to sell all his things and follow him. Because what is the rich young ruler asking about? It's like, how do you have eternal life? He's like, learn how to go through this process. Because that's everything. And that's actually where people are their most creative. And that's, I almost would say that's the only place you can be creative is when you're engaged in that process, where you where what you're aiming at, you lose it, you're plunged into the darkness, and then there you actually have like actual choices to make that actually help create the world and yourself. And this is where God trusts us. Because we can't necessarily, it's in those times God can't necessarily tell us what to do. So
well, he allows us he almost gives us the opportunity. Like, I'm trying to think about that, because it's like God, if God's all powerful, he could just tell us what to do every time, right? Like he has the power too. Yet he withholds that power to give us a gift of something and allows us to be in that. And that's where it's like, it's this gift. And it's, I mean, yeah, I'm struck by the emotion of it too, because there's something I think so true, that there are so many people with such a lack of trust in themselves in every realm of the religious and political spectrum, that they've lost such confidence in themselves to even act and do, and
Yeah.
they're debilitized. And like, you recognize that in yourself and the way that it shapes you, and it makes you question the belief of how much do we believe that God wants us in this world, like living and acting. Like, how much do we believe that he really wants to co-create with us versus this sort of dictator model that is caricatured in so many places, where it's this sky daddy who's telling us what to do
and protecting us.
And I think about that rich young ruler too. Like the first thing he said, how do I have eternal life? And he said, do follow the law and the prophets, live the way.
Well, first he asks, good teacher, what should I do? And he's like, just follow the law. And he's like, I did that. And he's like, okay. Well, he's like, good, keep doing that. And then the rich young ruler was like, how do I have eternal life? And then Jesus says, okay, it's like, you have to give up everything. And I just imagine, because like he was the rich young ruler, and you imagine he's coming to Christ and believes in what Christ's doing, and he's this sort of rich entrepreneurial guy, kind of has some a reputation that's good. He has some money that he would like to put to good use. He's followed the law. He's obviously ethical, and so you imagine he's approaching Christ to be like, I'll be your benefactor. I'll put my reputation, I'll put my influence, I'll put my wealth to help you in your purposes. And Jesus doesn't he doesn't say, hey, come follow me, as a rich young ruler. He just says, yeah, just keep doing what you're doing. You're fine. You're good. Keep obeying the law, keep doing what you're doing. But then the rich young ruler has the intuition enough to be like, well, how do I have eternal life? And then Christ says, well, first give everything you have to the poor. So you imagine all this wealth that he has, that he's able to do something with. Like if you give 1,000 people $1,000, that's $1 million right there. And it's just like, if you give like, what does $1,000 do to, like, we saw the checks that went out to people during the pandemic, like trillions of dollars in checks. And all that money's just gone. Like, who has that money anymore? Like, it's just like, I mean, it worked its way into the economy or whatever. It all ended up in the stock market. Who knows? But
we all bought Dogecoin.
Yeah, right. And but the $1,000 for that poor person will last, it'll help them out for sure. But it after a month, it's gone. And then they'll need another. And now he doesn't have his wealth. Now he doesn't even have that. And then Christ tells him, then just come follow me. Like, you don't even get to be a disciple. You don't get to be a benefactor. You get to be one of the many followers that follow me around the countryside. And so he loses all his identity. And Christ says that's the path to eternal life, because he would have to remake himself all over again. So he's built himself up into a rich young ruler. And the path to eternal life is being able to go all the way down and then back up again. Because if you can do that, whatever it is that's you that passes through all that is what's real and what is really you. You're not a rich young ruler. You're something more.
Well, the thing about suffering and tragedy and hardship, it's like a crucible where it burns off all the dead wood and you stop seeing. You have a at the end of it, it's really hard to feel like you bullshitted in the same way you were before. I'm sure we're still bullshitted, but
Right.
but there's this sense where it's like it's burnt something off, where all of a sudden you're not seeing the world in the same way. And there's something about beauty, truth, and goodness outlasting everything else. And it's like, but the path to get that is through the suffering and the hardship. And it doesn't mean that we should then just always voluntarily suffer and do the most.
No, you can't manipulate the process. Like you can't necessarily.
No. But it's like if you chase any of the transcendence, you're going to get really far, truth, beauty, or goodness. And that's why I can't be against the problem of the truth first mentality. Although I recognize it has its limitations, right? But it's like if you can follow beauty, it's this thing that embodies truth and it embodies truth and goodness in this way that is more effective, more powerful, and more transforming than if you put any of the other two on the top of the hierarchy.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true.
And it's like it gets you to do something, even if you're chasing the wrong thing. It gets you off the couch and does something so that you can then go, oh, maybe that isn't as good as I thought it was. And
right.
You can morph and you can change.
Yep.
But when it's the truth first mentality, it's my truth against your truth. And instead of, I really don't think it makes people more apt to find the ultimate truth. I think it makes them more apt to defend the truth that they already have. The idea of the ultimate thing that they already have, where beauty, it cuts through it like a knife in this way that you can't ignore. And it makes you see the nuances of things besides strict facts and figures. And like beauty, good rationality within beauty, like there's something beautiful to that, right? There's a part of that
totally.
That is beautiful. So there it has its place. But I mean, I think we're both on the same train here where it's like something's wrong about the path. It's got to change.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but I think that whole thing is like we as a culture have been kind of seeking truth first, and just like I was saying, like you kind of got to, the path is kind of leading us, and people are scared, and we've got to give up on that goal of having not necessarily truth, but having the certainty that we want. We don't get to have that. And this is difficult because this is some sort of cultural transformation that we have to go through. And as long as we insist, as long as we hold on to that, we're not going to be able to be transformed, and it's going to be more painful than if we this is like Peterson's saying, you voluntarily just face the darkness,
right?
And go toward the end. Because I was just listening to this guy who was saying, he was like you have to go into the darkness because that's where salvation is, and it's very difficult to find, but that's where it is. So
well, and if we're becoming the light, you have to go into the darkness so that other people can see it, because you don't recognize light as much when it's light.
Right.
So there's something about that too, where it's like you're also providing something, like when you go into the darkness, it's not for nothing.
Right.
And I don't know, I think for me, the more that I have let go of this need to feel the certainty
Mm-hmm.
has opened the door for me to feel more certain in the participation of it. And it's not
Yeah,
always
that's
right.
that trust in yourself.
Mhm. Well, I still lack it because I think trusting
Well,
in my
yeah, we're all learning like how to do this.
it's really hard what trusting myself has gotten me into some very dark places and
Oh, right.
has put stories in my life that are counterintuitive, right? Where it,
Mm-hmm.
on the face of it, in the modern materialistic sense, do not look successful. They do not look beautiful.
Yeah.
Yet, I, I'm in the deep of it and recognize the like the significant beauty and like opportunity to see beauty that I never would have gotten if I didn't go through that. And so there's
Well,
that.
yeah, and the opportunity to create, those are the creative things that both make you and that you're able to put something into the world that's actually new
Yeah.
and not like a copy of something else. And um
Mm.
the yeah, those places and those times are so valuable. And I guess it's important to like draw a distinction between like foolishly just like going with your whims and trusting yourself. I
Right.
think there's a difference between just sort of, it's not like, oh, whatever I think's good. It's that's not what I'm talking about when I was saying trust yourself. Because there's a way in which when we behold something beautiful and we see it and we want to follow it, um and even sort of follow it into what appears to be the darkness, um where people just be like, what are you doing? And this obviously isn't good. You shouldn't be doing this. You have no rational basis for this. Tell me your reasons. And you don't have good reasons. All you have is this like, oh, I'm talking about something like deep. It's not a whim. It's something that you feel. And it's not even, you may be being bullshitted. It doesn't matter. Like you have to um you know proceed somehow.
Right.
Because if you deny that, then you're 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 denying something. um I mean, how else are you going to practice trusting yourself unless you're willing to like make some catastrophic errors?
Right.
and 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 we're so afraid of making errors, and we shouldn't just be willy-nilly just being like, I guess it doesn't matter, I'll just do whatever. So
Right.
so it's proceeding with courage and being and using your head and thinking. So I'm not advocating not thinking it, but it's driven by that deep sort of vision of what is beautiful, and that'll, some of it is subjective, but that experience I think is universal.
Well, and that's where I think the place of community and tradition are super important when we're talking about the participation in these things. And those obviously, I come from this Orthodox place now, so that has
Mm-hmm.
its own sort of set for me, but this isn't exclusive to traditional religions. Even evangelical Protestant religions have a tradition. And that
Mm-hmm.
recognition of the support in that and the placement of that can help, but that has an effect. And that's where I think this question of denomination and church participation and the way we look at it, I think that is an area that needs to be explored more than just strictly the truth of those things. It's the effectiveness of which it gives us a good participation with the spiritual and that place where we have that sense of intuitive trust that's
Mm-hmm.
been built and guided by something that keeps you safe.
Right.
But even, I don't know, even in the places where I felt like I moved in instincts that weren't safe or that were more detrimental, I still look at that and go, well, I needed to go through that to see.
Right.
And like at the end of it, it's like that inversion of seeing like you get to the worst of you.
Yeah.
And it being flipped, and there's still that hope that like
Right.
there's a garden that we're moving towards.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reuniting of the spiritual and the physical,
Mm-hmm.
and this fullness, and that we're in a participation from it. And the mistakes are not unredeemable.
No.
It's
No.
beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. You wouldn't want to go through those kind of things again. But you just like, well, it now has served me and it has a purpose.
And it's not only that it serves you, it has this immense potential to serve others too. And I mean, I think we all do that. We go through these hard things in our life, and all of a sudden, like as time goes on, we get over it. We have this opportunity to help people through the same situation, because we're not the only ones going through it. We obviously have variations and differences, but we're all living similar stories.
Yeah. And that's redemption, and that's trusting in the redeeming power of God.
It's really hard though if you can't get your mind around that idea of it. it's like, oh, that's really nice to say. But I think part of that too, it's like you can't get there here. Like it's so experiential. And like there's certainly a place for this, and it can help you in the moments of doubt as you move forward. But
well, and the thing is to like, as you experience those things, to find the corresponding, like, that's what redemption is. That's what it means. And to have faith in the redemptive power of God is to also be able to move forward like that without having to have some sort of intellectual certainty, I guess, or what. But there's a way in which we can go to church, and we can kind of build this mental framework. And we never get outside of it, and we never get to touch the transcendent things that are actually attached to the parts of the framework. And I find, like, even when talking to people that come out of people coming out of church backgrounds that are distrustful to the framework, like, and they've experienced something transcendent, making those connections back to the framework in the right way, like, it's almost impossible for them, because they're just like, those words mean something different to me. And like, you're like, yeah, but we got to make the connection back to those transcendent things that you have experienced, so that they actually mean what they were meant to mean, rather than, because there's ways in which the religious language and stuff is more of a prison, and it's more controlling than it is allowing to point to transcendent realities that actually are a part of life.
Well, that was my biggest struggle with evangelicalism after coming back to church, because I never left the faith, but I stopped doing the church thing for a while. For my own sort of into the darkness reasons, right?
Right.
Even though I wouldn't have the words for that, I guess. But coming back, it was these words. We use these words, but do we really know what they mean? And the way that they are taken from the outside, I saw that, and it was really hard to just go back and continue submitting to the same paradigm and finding ways to make it real, but recognizing also I can't do without it either, at least in some sense. Because as much as we think by denying church and denying religion, we're escaping a framework. No, you still have a framework, but I think Tim Mackey said it. It's like, well, you're always brainwashing yourself somehow. Yeah. Right. Like whether it's with this or that, it's a brain shaping activity of what you're doing. And for me, I've at least gotten more trust in a methodology of a religious shape, because at least we can know at some area where it's coming from, and there's checks and balances and responsibility to it, versus when it's free for all and just pick from here, pick from there.
Right.
You know,
Well,
it's
there's benefits of like having that tradition, because it'll connect different things that will, if you've experienced, let's say, redemption, that like within the Christian tradition, redemption's tied to all sorts of stuff. And so if you make the connection from your experience to the idea of redemption, and then then follow like those connections within the tradition, like it'll open up the world to you in ways that like it would take you years and years and years of experiences to build that knowledge. Whereas if you can just get one thing down, and you're like, okay, I'll connect that to that, and I won't let it mean this thing that I was told when I was a kid, when they were wanting to just control me. I'll it's like naming things properly. Like I'll give it its I'll give these things their proper names. And sorry, I'll give these things their proper names and let them like not let them be defined by these ugly things,
the ugly patterns.
Right. And so it's not enough to just avoid the words and avoid the tradition and stuff, like you said. Like it just ends up being sort of like this sort of grab bag, and then you're just sort of left up to your experiences, which you don't have that ability to have that sort of world opening experience where if you can just get a couple things named correctly, the Bible or the liturgy and any of that stuff just starts to like explode with all kinds of things that you could never have expected.
Well, language is super powerful and super meaningful, and I really understand this sort of instinct to rename and redefine and repackage and what have you. But the truth is, we have baggage to words as human beings, and all of our baggage is different. And I don't think the best thing we can do is throw out the baggage. Well, you can't. It's it's almost tied to you. It's this thing that you can't always get rid of. And there's certainly a helpfulness in unpacking the baggage. But if we just unpack it and leave everything a mess, it's more chaos than when it was in its tight little package unseen. And it's learning how to unpack and repack and find ways to limit it and decide what we need to lose and what we can take with us and the way it shapes us. And so there's this project of what we're doing that. And I think that's part of what's happening in this truth first mentality of trying to repackage and redefine. But I don't know, there's something,
I mean, I don't know, like I think words are more portals than they are containers. And this gets to that you should be able to move through them into larger, into the relationships with all sorts of things, with other words, with stories, and with your own experiences. Like it should be something you should, it's like the wardrobe in C.S. Lewis's Narnia. Like a wardrobe's just a container, but the magic wardrobe is the one you can go through to a whole world. And so like it's, if I think if you're just unpacking and repacking words, you're still left with these containers, when they should be these portals that open things up. And so that's what I'm saying, like when trying to connect like the idea of redemption to that, the actual experience, to the actual transcendent reality of that, rather than trying to encapsulate it and have this stuff put inside of that, where like it should be something that goes out. It's like it's supposed to be an icon, right? It's supposed to be,
and I,
like,
I love that, like that imagery, that comparison to this wardrobe, because what do we see? It is this container that has these
Yeah.
clothes, but for some
Yep.
people it opens this world, and then some people it's just a wardrobe.
Yeah.
And
You
it's
say, I went through this, like, look at this wardrobe, and look at this. And they're just like, what are you talking about? Like, it's a wardrobe. There's a
like,
back to it.
yeah,
It's like, no,
there's something more.
I'm trying to tell you about Narnia.
Right. No, I really like that idea of words being portals, because I think it's, and especially in that frame of like the Narnia, because it's not that every word is going to be a portal for everyone. Yet
Yeah,
at
some people, all
times,
their words are wardrobes. They're just the
yes,
containers.
but there's that time where that word hits you and it transports you to another world and opens you up, and it expands your categories. And all of a sudden it's like the Mary Poppins bag, like,
Yeah.
so all of a sudden you pull in all these things out of this bag and you're like, where is this coming from?
Right.
It's
That's exactly it.
No, I love that. That's so interesting. I'm gonna be thinking about that for a long time.
Well, and yeah, and that's the way people are too. People aren't just containers for their emotions and experiences and their whatever. They're portals to whole worlds. And they connect to other people in different ways. And so, like, that's how I see, yeah.
Well, and it's all weaved together through story. And that's why we have this interest in this Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Because it's independent stories weaving them together in the way that our worlds do, connecting us to other stories.
Yeah. And even like the latest Spider-Man and stuff, the way in which they're able to weave the narrative together with the past stories, and like that movie, which I forget what even what it's called, but
No Way Home.
No Way Home, man, that is such a good movie. It's such a good movie.
I have to watch it.
No spoilers.
I'll watch it, and then we'll have a conversation about that.
yeah,
Although
because
the internet's
it
already spoiled it for me in a bit.
Right. But it weaves, like, because there's like these 3 different Spider-Man series that are kind of disconnected, and then they, in the animated one, they introduced the idea of the Spider-Verse,
which was such a good movie.
Yeah, it was so good. And I could just, that the animation, like, to every detail,
unbelievable.
They could, they had it. Like there's the one sequence, I don't know if you heard about this. There's the one sequence, like, so the boy's being taught how to be Spider-Man, and they're trying to escape from some guy, I can't remember, but they're swinging through the forest.
Yeah.
All right. And the kid's struggling to figure out how to use his webs to swing. And so he's kind of like flailing, and like, not, and Spider-Man is trying to tell him, he's like, no, you got to go like this and then release, and then this and then release. And he's like trying to get him to get the smooth motion of the rhythm of, and in the animation, so they animate on every other frame. So it's 24 frames a second. And they usually will animate 12 of the frames, and then so it's repeated. And it gives it a certain look, which they have in that movie. But they offset the kid and Spider-Man, the young Spider-Man, the older Spider-Man, by 1 frame while he was struggling. and so like they're, and then as the kid gets a hang of it and starts moving smoothly, they synced up the animation to where I don't know if that makes sense. Like, so
it makes sense to me, but it might not make sense to other people. But I know more.
But anyway, the point is like they're going to that level of detail,
right,
of offsetting the animations, then having them sync up according to the narrative. I don't know. I just think it's so cool.
Well, that's what I think people don't realize. It's like the technical choices, the best filmmakers, the technical choices they make mean something. And so many people who aren't interested in film, they don't get what
Yeah.
24 frames even means. They're like, what? But it's like there's something so beautiful about a way like a really confident filmmaker can use these little things to like infuse meaning and create a viewing experience that connects you in this intuitive way that doesn't. That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite facts about that movie. But like the newer Spider-Man, they weave the narrative together between the three different disconnected Spider-Man movies in such a brilliant way. And yeah, you need to see that movie. For sure.
I'll watch it. It's on my list.
I think it's my favorite Marvel movie.
Oh wow, okay.
It's really good.
I've heard mixed things about it. Some people love it. Some people are like, it was stupid.
The people that think it's stupid don't understand. Yeah, I think you'll like it.
Okay. I do like Spider-Man. Spider-Man, because I don't watch a lot of the Marvel movies, but when I was a kid, Spider-Man's ones were the first ones we'd watched. And I really liked those ones. I really liked the Andrew Garfield one. I mean, I get why people didn't like it, but I love Mark Webb. I think he's brilliant because he did like 500 Days of Summer. He directed 500 Days of Summer. And then he does a lot of music videos, which is actually interesting. He does like done several Weezer music videos and
like he's directing them.
Yeah, he directs a lot of music videos.
Oh, interesting.
He's just so interesting, but I love the relational aspects and the simplicity he brought to a lot of those things. But each of them had such a distinct feel to them. But yeah, I'll watch it. I'll let you know what I think. Yeah. I mean, Marvel's so interesting because it is this like modern mythology that everybody knows. Even if you don't watch them all, you have some sense of them. And
it's the most expensive piece of artwork ever created.
And it never wins awards.
I know, right? But it's of anything in the world that we know, it's cost more than anything we know. Right. And I don't even know what the budgets are for all the movies put together. Oh, and then all the comic books and everything. The budget, it's in the billions and billions and billions of dollars.
Well, it's something too, the way it's shaping the way we see morality. Like it truly is doing that with this fight.
And the new Spider-Man is like taking that to another level.
Okay, now I really have to watch this.
Yeah, you need to watch it today if you can. Okay, or it's late there, but
I've got homework from Jess now.
I know.
Well, we've been talking for a while, so I'll try to wrap it up. But I do want to ask you because I know you're really into beauty ethics, and so maybe we'll close with this. I'm obviously into beauty ethics too, and I'm gonna say it. I take responsibility for you being into it, for introducing you to that book. But I get so excited. I'm like, yes, Luke always tries to put my things. Jeff invented randos. Jess brought in the beauty ethics. I'm like, no, man, it was me, but who cares?
I'll try to correct him.
No, I've already done it. I'm like, Luke, no. But no, I'm like, I don't care who gets credit for it. As long as people are talking about it, that's amazing. And honestly, Shelley's priest is the one who gets the real credit because he introduced us to it. So, but how as an artist has that changed the way you look at what you do? Because I mean, obviously you do animations for marketing and stuff, but there's still a part of you that's an art and there's an artistic element to that. Like how has it changed you? Because for me, I think it's been a portal to so many different things.
Yeah, I think I mean I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, was just like that script writing process, starting with the words as opposed to like starting with the music or the visuals. There's something to starting with the music that's different than starting with the words, and it corresponds with sort of this beauty first approach. And when I say music, I have like a stock music library, and so like I'll go in there and I'll listen to 50 different songs, and then I'll pull the one that I want, and then I'll actually end up editing it down and then moving parts so that the build happens here rather than here, and then the slow part happens here rather than here, and then it speeds, so like that whole thing of like trying to get sort of the intuitive feeling right, because it's some people have a hard time grasping. You're just like, okay, so you just pick the music first. Like, no, like I'm trying to like, I have an idea of what it should be. So that's why I listen to 50 different tracks, is because I'm trying to find the right one. And then when I find the right one, I got to edit that. So even at in itself as a song, it's not correct. And so then I've got to move the pieces around a bit. And then I start crafting the words and start putting the you know the there'll be like um a description that will have to be in the script, and so I have to figure out how that fits, and like where in the flow of things should a description be. And then when the description comes, it just sort of seems like it's just part of the flowing, instead of just being like, now here's a description of the da, 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 and then it goes on. So
Right.
and part of it is like that's how I do things anyway. So it's been a lot of just sort of building confidence and trust in myself. Trust in myself that like I have something inherent that I can offer and do in when I do production, because there's other people, they do good work, and they do script first, and they do like everything's very technical and non-intuitive and like whatever. They're just like, let's just do something cool. You're like, all right, dude. and they do things their way, and they do things great. And on some projects I'm kind of told what to do, and other projects like I have a little bit more freedom. And then on those projects where I have more freedom, I definitely do it that way, and I have more confidence in like how I do things and whatever. Because when I was a kid, in my teens and early 20s, I would just edit videos to music, I would make like just take a bunch of video clips from something my friends did, or a mission trip we were on or whatever, and then edit it together, and then make some sort of, and people are like, oh, that's inspirational or whatever. But I didn't really realize that I was like sort of beginning to hone this ability to kind of sense what is right and wrong as far as aesthetics and beauty, and create something from it.
Yeah, that's how I cut my teeth too.
Yeah.
Yeah, those youth group trips where
Yep.
they're like, you got to have that highlight reel.
right
Uh-huh.
We gotta have something to show the church.
But there was something so fun about that. And I think for me too,
Oh, yeah.
like the first sort of times that I got interested in storytelling was like through music, where you'd hear this music and all of a sudden it tells you a deeper story that is interconnected with this story that it's already telling.
Yeah.
And that need and that want to do that. And I almost went into the music video field. I was going to go to Biola, and they have like a project specifically for that. And I'm very glad I didn't, because I would be in massive amounts of debt. I got my degree and my education much more reasonably, and probably better suited for what I ended up doing.
Talk about using beauty to trick people. Get them to go to expensive film schools and audio engineering schools.
I know. That's a whole interesting conversation too. But no, it's there's something very powerful to that. And I think as a filmmaker, why I like filmmaking is because it is able to weave all of these different types of beauty in together, and show the way that they impact and move us towards something. And and I think for me, it's just shown me that there is such a value in art, whether you can find a way to monetize it or not. Like there's a value in human beings participating in that and cultivating that. And I'm thankful I work, or at least now work in a career at part-time where I can do that. And, I don't know if I can find ways to fully make money at some of the things I do, but a little bit. And allowing that to be at that place to work through, but finding other ways too where I can learn to gain confidence in myself through these different arts. And I think I was talking
Mm-hmm.
about this with you a while back, but I've been really interested in the idea of improvisational art and the way
All
that
right.
all of those different frames, whether it's like improv comedy or dance or
Mm-hmm.
even just like, drawing or painting or whatever, creates this space where you can learn what it is to trust yourself and test your limits and find those
Right.
balances. And they teach you something so much about your internal state and the way that you are that I think nothing else can. And
Yeah.
no, I
And
think,
building up the practice and the skill set to just improvise. That's a whole thing. Like people that are good at it are really good at it.
yeah. Well, and it's the funny thing is we all do it every day of our lives, right? We're all professional improvisers. It just when
Yeah.
you're told to be put on a stage or pressured to do an improvisation that you're not comfortable with, it suddenly gets really
Right.
fearful. But there's something about embodying those practices that I think is really therapeutic. And I think it
Mm.
actually like tells you stories and unlocks things in you that you could never have known if you just sat and looked at a book and tried to figure it out in your head.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
And that's where it's really given me the confidence to like move forward in those and like advocate, I guess, for those things or like
Mm-hmm.
experiment at least with those things and see the beauty in that. Cause I think before it's always like, and I think particularly in the type of Protestant frame that I grew up with, it's like, we got to hold on to truth and know it and be able to share it.
Yep.
And it's like, yeah, but there's two different types of knowing. There's a knowing and then there's a knowing, like a
Yep.
full embodied thing. And
Yep.
we're really lost track of the other one. And I hope beauty can save the world. I believe it
Amen.
can.
I think so too. I'm counting on it.
Yeah, me too. I'm bought in. I bet the house on it. So
Yep. Good for you.
well, anyways, this has been so lovely. Is there any other
Thanks,
sort of
Cassidy.
last minute things you want to add before we close?
I don't think so. I'm just surprised I didn't talk about the book of Job because usually I end up wedging that somewhere.
Next time we'll talk about
Next time we'll talk
Spider-Man
about
and we'll talk about
Spider-Man and Job.
the hidden symbolic symbolism of Job in Spider-Man No Way Home.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you so much for watching. As always, I will close with serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.